Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I have actually never been to Pittsburgh before, and I want you to know the sacrifice I'm making. I am missing game day in Eugene. So go Ducks, and let's see what happens tonight. For those of you who have the least bit of interest in football, you know what I'm talking about. Others, forget it. Anyhow, yes, I've been working on development issues and political Islam in Pakistan and gender and development issues for a very long time. I am a sociologist, and it's through the eyes of a sociologist that I frame the arena of international studies work in which I teach. I'm also the vice president of the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, and I'm only mentioning that to emphasize that, to mention to you all that there are a lot of grant opportunities, especially for graduate students, to go to Pakistan now. So whereas the country had been closed to use US dollars to do research there, there's now a lot of opportunities. So during lunch, if you're interested, feel free to talk to me or email me about that. So it's been over 60 years since political independence from Britain, and that's the point that I'll start the narrative of the history of Pakistan from. And here's a map of Pakistan. Over 60 years since independence from Britain, the political state of affairs within Pakistan has arguably never been worse. Violence permeates social life on a daily basis, as suicide bombings have become more common than anyone could ever have imagined. Equally disturbing is the commonly held belief that external forces, India's raw, the United States' Blackwater, that it's external forces that are responsible for this violence, instead of a popular social interrogation into the myriad domestic reasons behind them. These reasons are not solely associated with the Pandora's box of politicized Islam that was opened by Zia ul-Haq 33 years ago, but are tied as well to the inequities of provincial power relations. So, for example, over here is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which used to be the Northwest Frontier Province, which is continuously feeling exploited by the central government, for low hydroelectric power payments, and Baluchistan, which is down here. Baluchistan feeling equally exploited for low natural gas payments. Hence, there's been a lot of gas lines that have been blown up in Baluchistan. Also, infrastructural decline. There's daily electrical outages, limited investment in education and healthcare, resulting in highly weakened systems, massive destruction and displacement due to the July-August 2010 mega floods, and also the flagrant abuse of power by official entities, and an overall sense of social malaise that the average person's access to legal, economic, political, and social justice is compromised in Pakistan on a daily basis. Pakistan today is the 6th most populous country in the world, with a population of about 180 million. And they do censuses in Pakistan, but for political reasons, those censuses have often been delayed. And that's another issue we can talk about later. But it has a population of about 180 million people, but it also has one of the world's highest population growth rates. Its land area, you can see it here, and you can see it in juxtaposition to Afghanistan, and India is to the east of Pakistan. Its land area is only 32nd in size in the world. So Pakistan's population is also not evenly distributed throughout the country, raising dramatically from sparsely populated Baluchistan, over here, Sibi. Quetta is the provincial capital. Sibi is supposed to be the hottest place on the face of the earth. And then going down here, other parts of Baluchistan. So it's ranging from some of the most sparsely populated areas of Baluchistan to some of the highest densities in the world in Karachi over here, and over here especially in the old city of Lahore. Greater numbers of people are demanding goods and services in the country, and most of them are living in densely populated cities that have become very difficult to navigate physically as well as politically. Electricity, sanitation, water, and food are now priced at a premium that seems unaffordable to many. There is no national consensus in Pakistan on such things as how to share water, what the rights of women inherently have, what comprises a good education aside from having served time as a student, or an ideal vision of civil-military relations. We read nothing about social investment aside from base numbers of literates and no interrogation of the contours of what are the necessary components to being a member of Pakistani society fully engaged in the life of the country. Yet these issues are central to our understanding of Pakistan's domestic political scrimmages and the international role it is playing in today's world. What transpires in the domestic political terrain is now intrinsically related to myriad global concerns in a variety of ways and for a variety of reasons. So just to go back a little in time, political history since independence, Pakistan was formed as an independent state in the partition of British India that took effect on 14th August 1947. India became independent on 15th of August 1947. They didn't have an interlocutor to make those agreements, and so they declared independence on different days. This division was the result of demands by the Muslim League, led by Mohammed Ali Jinnah, which was seeking a homeland for Muslims where they would not be at risk of discrimination or persecution by the Hindu majority in post-independence India. Based principally on where Muslims were in the majority, well actually you can't see Bangladesh on this map, you will see it later. Based principally on where Muslims were in the majority in the subcontinent, the new country initially comprised the northeast and northwest sections. Pakistan's formidable Muslim population came from diverse practices and heritages. These ranged among Sunnis from the austere Deobandi school, the Sufi-oriented Barelvi school, the orthodox Ahle Hadith, to the modernist Aligarh school, and among Shias from the followers of the 12 Imams, to the disciples of the Aga Khan, to members of the Dawoodi Bohra and Memon communities, which today are mostly in Karachi in Pakistan, but of course a larger population is in Mumbai in India. Notwithstanding these formal divisions, Sufi teachers who had spread Islam throughout the subcontinent still had their followings, as we heard before when we were hearing about Afghanistan, and most Bengali Muslims, accustomed to a much more syncretic Islamic tradition, found little in common with the rest. The name of the new country, which I mentioned yesterday when Muqtadar Khan was talking about the importance of Kashmir, the name of the new country, which in Urdu, the national language of Pakistan, also means land of the pure. Pak means pure, Stan is land of, so Pakistan. It's actually an acronym, and it was formulated to represent its constituent parts. The P for Punjab, the populous eastern province. K for what is referred to as Afghania. It was formerly the Northwest Frontier Province. It's now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but it's where the Pakhtuns live, but they called it Afghania. K was for Kashmir, so from the outset, perceived as a component part of Pakistan. The I doesn't exist in Urdu. It's just a short vowel to make, to kind of make it flow. And the S stands for Sindh in the south, the southern province where Karachi is. And the Tan is the final syllable in Baluchistan, the southwest province. So what's missing from this acronym is B for Bengal, whose eastern half made up East Pakistan from 1947 to 1971. Separated from West Pakistan by about 1,600 kilometers of Indian territory and huge linguistic and cultural differences, even differences in the daily practice and understanding of Islam, East Pakistan became the independent state of Bangladesh in December of 1971. Importantly, too, when Kashmir was not included as a part of Pakistan in 1947, Pakistan immediately set out to liberate the area. I don't know if I should use quotes or not, because it did liberate part of Kashmir. It set out to liberate the area in the 1948 war with India and hence annex the now quasi-autonomous Azad Kashmir, which stands, Azad means free. So Azad Kashmir is up here, free Kashmir, and it actually has its own prime minister and its own form of government. The federal government of Pakistan is only legally responsible for its external affairs and not for what happens internally in Azad Kashmir. And it also liberated parts of what now comprises Pakistan's newest province, its fifth province, Gilgit-Baltistan, which was formerly the northern areas up here, Gilgit and Baltistan. But that has now, in 2010, actually become the fifth province of Pakistan. So if you're studying any of these history books, they probably still say it only has 4 provinces. It actually has 5, plus FATA, plus the federally administered tribal areas I'll talk about in a bit, and Azad Kashmir. It is sobering to reflect on how Pakistan has transformed since 1947, when British India, when it became independent from British India and Pakistan was a homeland for Muslims, that was carved out of its northern corners. But from the outset, questions, debates, and mistrust of a shared vision by its leaders arose. Mohammed Ali Jinnah, a British-trained lawyer who rose to be the founding father of the country, the Quaid-e-Azam, and other Western-oriented professionals really did, in all their writings and in their speeches, they envisioned a multi-ethnic, pluralistic, democratic state free from the hegemony of any one group. The hope for this is evident in Jinnah's inaugural presidential address to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan 3 days prior to independence, when he declared that, and I quote him here, "If we want to make this great state of Pakistan happy and prosperous, we should wholly and solely concentrate on the well-being of the people, and especially of the masses and the poor," end quote. Jinnah encouraged the rise of a vigorous civil society, one in which ethnic and religious divides would be set aside so as to promote the overall well-being of the new country, when he said, and again I'll quote him here, "If you work together in a spirit that every one of you, no matter to what community he belongs, no matter what relations he had with you in the past, no matter what is his color, caste, or creed, is first, second, and last a citizen of this state with equal rights, privileges, and obligations, there will be no end to the progress you will make. You are free. You are free to go to your temples, you are free to go to your mosques, or to any other places of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state." Jinnah regarded Pakistan as the culmination of what had finally become a mass-based grassroots movement, expanded to consist of people from a range of ethnic, class, regional, and religious backgrounds, a profusion of groups working together for the overall well-being of the state, regardless of their divisions. Jinnah and other leaders of the new state expected that these differences would be resolved within a Republican context. As a popular consensus existed, Jinnah believed that a popular consensus existed on the state's necessity, viability, and structure. Most citizens of the new state, whether originally hailing from areas deemed in the 1947 partition to become part of Pakistan, or the hordes of migrants called Muhajirs, who left everything behind in those areas ceded to India as they boarded trains for Pakistan, most of them shared a conviction that they had achieved something pivotal for the Muslims of South Asia. The havoc and social chaos that became the legacy of partition kindled a unifying spirit among many of the citizenry of the new state. Pakistan's future held great promise, according to the mainstream populist narrative. While substantive political and economic challenges confronted the new state, most Pakistanis believed that these would be surmounted over time. Alternative viewpoints, however, also existed from the outset. Distinct groups initially wanted no part of Pakistan, but for different reasons. Supporters of the Punjab Unionist Party had placed their loyalties with the British. Their successors still identify with global culture as they educate their children in British-style schools, speak English amongst themselves, and they tend to value indigenous aesthetics only as quaint historic relics. Many Pakhtuns, you were hearing about Pakhtuns and talking about Afghanistan, probably more Pakhtuns live in Pakistan, find my mouse, in this area. And of course, many Pakhtuns have gone to many other parts of Pakistan. But at the outset, many Pakhtuns refused to accept the international boundary line, this line, between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is a legacy of the British. They refused to accept the international boundary line as the Durand Line had been demarcated by the British, while most Baluch weren't even sure, down here, what the new country held for them at all. Distinct madrasas, religious schools, particularly those run by the Deobandis in India, initially recoiled from the demand for Pakistan on the grounds that Islam could not be limited by the borders of a nation state, on the argument that a Muslim's identity is first and foremost with the religion, which has no sentient boundaries. After partition, many Indian Muslims, however, soon migrated out of necessity to Pakistan. They were fearful of the violence and all that was going on. Once arriving there, many then viewed Pakistan's possibilities as limitless, creating a Dar-ul-Islam, an abode of Islam, once their new compatriots would understand their message. So you had a lot of conflicting groups that, while the populist narrative is this was the demand for Pakistan, there was a lot of groups who didn't quite buy into that, even from the outset. It was in the character of the country's founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, where a semblance of unity was able to exist among the myriad contending political stakeholders. This was short-lived, however, as he died on September 11, 1948, barely a year after the country's birth. While succeeded by the country's first prime minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, as the nation's leader, consensus on key political issues now became far more elusive. This transformed into a disastrous precedent when Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated on October 16, 1951, 3 years later. So regarding the initial focus of the new state in Pakistan, it was initially on basic survival. Following the first war with India over Kashmir in 1948, many Pakistanis feared that without a strong military, the country could be decimated by India. The delay in framing a constitution certainly didn't help alleviate these fears. Fractious views emerged from both West and East Pakistan on what structure the state should take. I mean, it didn't have the guiding principles, for example, that India had in its constitution, which was done fairly early, by 1951 in India. But in Pakistan, it would be labored on for many more years. So finally, 9 years after independence, on March 23, 1956, Pakistan had a constitution. But that was its first of 3 constitutions. There were other contentious disputes in the country's first decade of existence, especially concerning the raison d'etre of the new country that in turn led to disputes regarding the rights of different groups. In the wake of the anti-Ahmadiyya demonstrations and the imposition of martial law in the Punjab provincial capital of Lahore in 1953, the federal government commissioned something called the Munir Report to inquire into the cause of the riots. Hamid Khan, author of the most comprehensive constitutional history of Pakistan to date, he notes that the report's observations of the role being played by politicized Islam then and the sectarian factionalism it fomented is foreboding when considering the state of the country 50 years later. So he wrote this after the riots of 1953, after the investigation, but it's interesting, it could have been written today, and I quote him, "From the interviews with leaders of various sects and schools of Islam, that they could not stand one another and called each other kafirs, non-believers, as well. According to the Barelvi ulama, Deobandis and Wahhabis were outside the pale of Islam. Remember, the Barelvis are the school of Islam that supports Sufism. So they're saying the Deobandis and the Wahhabis, more the Salafis, are outside the pale of Islam. And according to a fatwa, a religious edict of the Deobandis, all Asna Ashari Shias were kafirs. So the year the first constitution was framed, 1956, proved to be politically disastrous for the country and laid a foundation for the fractious, unrepresentative politics that would characterize much of Pakistan's future. Two weak governments lacking a majority led to serious uncertainty and instability, culminating in President Iskandar Mirza declaring the first martial law in the country on October 7, 1958. He was soon sent into exile by Ayub Khan, who had been his commander-in-chief of the army since 1951 and was more recently defense minister, and now as chief martial law administrator, he declared himself president of the country 3 weeks later. Pakistan's first foray into having a constitution was a short-lived accomplishment on two fronts. Not only was Pakistan's final constitution soon abrogated by the declaration of martial law, but it would also be replaced twice, in 1962 and 1973. It's the latter constitution of 1973 that remains in force today, but it has been highly edited since then. Now, Ayub Khan, depicted here, ushered in what many economists call the golden age of development in Pakistan from 1958 to 1968. So people reminisce as this having been this special golden age of development, and it's especially, people wax romantically about it, especially the industrial elite of the country. Industrial and financial power became highly centralized as Pakistan developed what was called the 22 families in the country, who came to completely control Pakistan's economy. During this era, Pakistan's economy grew substantially in this decade. Feudal families that embraced innovation became successful. Those which did not, along with the vast majority of the country that was poor to begin with, however, saw their options diminish over the years, resulting in exaggerated ethnic and class divisions. Industrialists emerged as a key class in this era and were able to contest the political might of the old feudal groups, given the unprecedented expansion of their economic clout, along with their newfound alliances with the military. So as the military was empowered this entire time. Despite the relative economic prosperity during this era, public dissatisfaction with unrepresentative democracy, a deteriorating law and order situation, and Ayub's authoritarian control resulted in demonstrations throughout the country in late 1968. India and Pakistan had fought another war over Kashmir in 1965, in which Pakistan ostensibly suffered a humiliating defeat. The army clearly had fallen out of favor with the people by 1968. So the ensuing political chaos resulted in Ayub Khan's resignation and his handing over power to General Yahya Khan, his army chief of staff. Yahya Khan summarily abrogated the 1962 constitution, which again had been put into force for a little bit, and declared the second martial law on March 25th, 1969. The national elections held the following year in 1970 proved decisive and disastrous for Pakistan. The Awami League of East Pakistan won 167 seats, and the Pakistan People's Party, the Awami League of East Pakistan won 167 seats, defeating the Pakistan People's Party, and it was the Awami Party that emerged as the majority party in the country. The Pakistan People's Party had won just half that number of seats. They just won 86 seats in the country. Powerful forces in West Pakistan, including the influential leader of the Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, So this shows what had been East Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh and West Pakistan. So powerful forces in West Pakistan refused to accept the outcome that Pakistan would be led by forces in East Pakistan. How could East Pakistan actually form the government? There had been a situation truly of internal colonialism, raw materials being grown, jute was the main product of East Pakistan, and exploited by feudal powers and industrialists in West Pakistan. And the East Pakistan, there was a history of protests that I really haven't gone into because this would become way too long. But finally, when the straw that broke the camel's back in this alliance was when the Awami League in East Pakistan won the majority of seats in the election, defeated the PPP in West Pakistan, and people said, no, we can't have. How could East Pakistan govern the country? So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto refused to accept the outcome that Pakistan would be led by forces in East Pakistan. East Pakistan summarily seceded from the Republic. India quickly came to its aid. A third horrific war was fought between India and Pakistan, and the result was the dismemberment of the country. East Pakistan officially seceded in December 1971 and became the independent country of Bangladesh. Just a reminder of where it is. The political fallout of this action was immediate. The Pakistan Army, the one institution most Pakistanis considered worked well in the country, was now disgraced. Yahya Khan resigned, and PPP chairperson Zulfikar Ali Bhutto became the head of state. Soon afterwards, Yahya Khan resigned and went into exile for a bit. So soon afterwards, Bhutto and Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi agreed to a new boundary in Kashmir, the line of control. And I can show that to you roughly here on this map. The line of control is somewhere over there. It's not an agreement to resolve the conflict, but it was an agreement that we wouldn't send, that this was the temporary international boundary between the two countries in Kashmir. While still officially disputed, it has become the de facto international border between these two countries in Kashmir. Having campaigned on a platform of Islamic socialism, Bhutto initiated a series of policies promoting nationalization of vital industries and greater integration of Islamic practices into the activities of the state and social life. On 14th August 1973, remember 14th August is Independence Day, 26 years exactly after having achieved independence, Pakistan inaugurated its third constitution, which despite having been amended and edited numerous times since then, remains the paramount foundation of law in the country to this day. The land reforms instituted by Bhutto's government, coupled with the PPP's support of industrial unions and workers' rights, resulted in the PPP being associated in the popular imagination with supporting the rights of the poor. Whether borne out in fact or not, this ideology persists to this day and still provides really the mainstream of support for the PPP. People will say, isn't this the political party that cares about the poor's rights? I don't think we have proof of it anymore, but the ideology the practices of the early to mid 1970s with the land reforms and supporting workers' rights and unions really laid that foundation. Prime Minister Bhutto called for national elections to be held in early spring 1977. Now, from all accounts, he and the PPP party would have won that election. But it appears that Bhutto was determined to have a landslide victory. Amid charges of rigging the elections and popular protests, his chief of the army staff, you've got to be careful who you appoint as chief of the army staff in Pakistan, his chief of the army staff, Zia-ul-Haq, on July 5th, 1977, overthrew Bhutto in what became Pakistan's third coup d'etat. Charged with abetting the murder of a political rival in Lahore, Bhutto was thrown in prison and ultimately killed there. In April 1979, he was hung for those charges. It is popularly understood, however, that Zia had been determined to eliminate his former leader. So Pakistan's again under military rule, but Zia does something different. He introduces an Islamization program. Now, after July 5th, 1977, at that time, Zia vowed to hold elections quickly. After a number of such promises, it became apparent, though, that he was determined to stay in power. And he did something very different than anybody else had ever done. On February 2nd, 1979, he took this unprecedented action by promulgating an Islamization program in Pakistan, an act that would have long-lasting implications for state and society in that country for years to come. While the Islamization program affected the political landscape in general, its most serious implications were on the rights and roles of women. No substantive program of Islamic reforms had existed in Pakistan prior to Zia's Islamization program. The country had not even been declared to be an Islamic republic until its second constitution in 1965. So now, 8 years later, the third constitution of 1973 finally included other references to Islam and the supremacy of Islamic laws, and had mandated the establishment of the Council of Islamic Ideology to ensure that no laws in Pakistan are in contradiction to the Sharia. Zia's Islamization program consisted of establishing a zakat-based welfare or taxation system, a profit and loss banking option, not total system, in accordance with Islam's prohibitions against usury, and an Islamic penal code entitled the Hudud Ordinances. Selectively gleaned from fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, the Hudud Ordinances focused on enforcing punishments for three kinds of crimes explicitly outlined in Islamic Sharia: theft of private property, the consumption of intoxicants, and adultery and fornication, referred to as zina. The most controversy over the Hudud Ordinances swirled around the latter, the zina clause, both because the ordinance governing it made no legal distinction between adultery and rape, and its enforcement was highly discriminatory against women, as it became relatively easy for a woman to be charged with and hence arrested for adultery. If a woman made a claim of rape but couldn't prove that she was actually raped, she could also be imprisoned. It's not surprising, therefore, that uneducated women with no experience of how a legal system operates, nor funds for legal defense, they came to populate Pakistan's prisons. At that time, while this was still in force, I was once told by the district superintendent of police in Sargodha that 98% of the women in Sargodha who were in prisons had been charged with adultery. And I said, so how many do you think were actually guilty of adultery? He said, absolutely none. Because if a woman was actually guilty of adultery and her family knew, they would just take her out to a field and they would return without her quietly. But it was the charge of adultery. You want to get rid of a wife, you want to have vengeance against a family, other types of quarrels. A woman would be charged with adultery. That would shame not only her, but her entire family. It was just the reality of what ended up happening because of this Hudud Ordinance. 4 years later, Zia promulgated the Law of Evidence, but in 1983. The Law of Evidence was equally discriminatory against women, but finally it was upheld only in cases concerning economic transactions, which would have restricted women from providing evidentiary testimony in certain kinds of cases and require corroboration by another woman in other kinds of cases. But because it was upheld in terms of economic transactions, the law clearly gives men and women different legal rights and at least underscores that the state did not regard women and men as equal economic actors. And if you don't regard them as equal economic actors, do you indeed regard them as equal citizens? Zia's Islamization program, however, was pursued in a rather complicated ideological framework. Zia stance contradicted popular culture in which most people were personally very religious, but not publicly religious. An untoward outcome was that by relying on an Islamically based policy, the state fomented factionalism. By legislating what is Islamic and what is not, Islam itself could no longer provide unity, as it was now being defined to exclude previously included groups. Importantly, too, the state had attempted to dictate a specific ideal image of women in Islamic society. In fact, Zia was popularly coining the term chadr or chardawari. Chadr or chardawari, remaining veiled and within the four walls of one's home. This became the image that was popularized by the state under Zia's regime. And it was largely antithetical to that existing in popular sentiments and in everyday life. But this has transformed since then. Who can predict the fate of Zia's government and this was some of the protests that women had against the Hudud Ordinance and the Law of Evidence. Who can predict the fate of Zia's government had the USSR not invaded Afghanistan that fateful day of December 26, 1979? While Pakistan had essentially fallen off the US radar, it had previously been a very close ally, its importance was suddenly rejuvenated as it quickly became a frontline state in the US proxy war in Afghanistan with the USSR. The US government put together a non-military aid package to Pakistan for $3.2 billion for 1982 to 1987. This was followed with an allocation, remember, non-military aid allocation of $4.1 billion for the 1988 to 93 period. Full details on the total amount of the military support given to Pakistan remain unclear and confidential, but it was certainly far greater than the military support. And then came the democratic interregnum, I call it, from 1988 to 1999. On August 17, 1988, Zia ul-Haq, along with then U.S. Ambassador Arnie Rafel, died in a mysterious plane crash whose cause has never been fully established. There's a wonderful novel called A Case of Exploding Mangoes that gives some thoughts as to who was behind it, but it's a novel. It's not a historical account. So that November 1988, elections were finally held. Remember, he had his coup July 5th, 1977, implemented his Islamization program February 2nd, 1979, and it was not until November of 1988 that elections were finally held in Pakistan, and Benazir Bhutto, who was now leader of the PPP, succeeding her late father, she was invited to form a government, and in December 1988, she became the first female prime minister of any Muslim country in the world. There was the question of, could she lead, given that she was a woman, the emir, according to the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet, is supposed to be a man, but there was a fatwa that was issued that the president of the country needed to be a man, according to the equivalent of what an emir was. Since she was the leader of a political party and was becoming prime minister, there was no restrictions on a woman holding the position of prime minister. Very interesting. So the ensuing 11-year democratic interregnum saw Benazir Bhutto and her PPP party jockeying for power with Nawaz Sharif, the scion of an industrial family who had revised the Pakistan Muslim League, the PML, and then gave it a different acronym, the PML-N, meaning the faction of the PML that Nawaz led. However, during this period of time, 1988 to 1999, social conditions continued to deteriorate. While each government was dismissed twice on charges of corruption, culminating in General Pervez Musharraf declaring martial law, and that was Nawaz Sharif's appointed Chief of the Army Staff. He declared martial law on October 12, 1999. But before I talk about that, let's reflect on what are these 11 years this democratic interregnum best known for. Frankly, there were no major political transformations, there were no alliance-building efforts, or even any major catastrophes during that time period, other than Pakistan's detonating a nuclear weapons test in May of 1999 and the Kargil incident getting out of control in the summer of the next year, 1999, and now Pakistan, everybody acknowledged, was a nuclear-armed country. It soon became evident that the military was just fed up with the democratic experiment, as were the people. So Pakistan, once again, had another foray into military rule. This is showing Nawaz Sharif. These are the years of Benazir Bhutto's PPP governments, and these are the years of Nawaz Sharif's PMLN governments. When Pervez Musharraf, who's on the right over here, when Pervez Musharraf, Pakistan Chief of the Army Staff, was flying back to Pakistan from Sri Lanka on October 12, 1999, then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif gave the ill-fated order that Musharraf's aircraft not be allowed to land in Pakistan, apparently out of fear of an impending coup d'etat. This quickly became an international incident, especially as Musharraf was flying on a passenger aircraft, and everyone suddenly on board had become in-flight hostages, right? India would not allow Pakistan's reigning Chief of the Army Staff, who was on that plane, to land in India. Fuel was running out. So upon the aircraft finally landing in Karachi, Nawaz was arrested and Musharraf's 9-year rule began. I have to tell you that throughout Pakistan at that time, people were handing out mitai and celebrating. That's how disillusioned people had become with both of the, quote, democratically elected governments, which hadn't done anything during the 11 years of that democratic interregnum at that time. They hadn't done anything for the economy. They hadn't built political coalitions and alliances. They hadn't moved Pakistan forward. And in fact, inflation was rampant and people were very alienated. But think about also what was happening at this time. The Taliban had taken control in Afghanistan. While the United States had been a willing supporter of Pakistan during the time, the non-military funds that had been given to the government of Pakistan while the Soviet Union was still in Afghanistan, as soon as the Soviet Union pulled out, suddenly U.S. support in Pakistan pulled out as well. So after Pervez Musharraf on October 12, 1999, he landed in Karachi. The military arrested Nawaz Sharif for treason, and Musharraf's 9-year rule began. But instead of self-anointing himself as the chief martial law administrator, as previous military rulers had done, he declared himself the chief executive, in line with the idea that he would lead the country onto a more solid economic footing. He appointed a number of civil society activists to key positions in his cabinet, such as the late Omar Asghar Khan, who was the Minister of Environment, a women's activist from the province of Sindh, who'd long been associated with education NGOs, became the Minister of Education. In the first week of September of 2001, Musharraf launched a new task force on human development initiative. I was there. It was electrifying that the state in Pakistan was going to move forward on a human development initiative. Its goals were to undertake a universal primary education plan, an adult literacy program, primary health care plan, skills training, and microcredit programs, and the like. But that was the first week of September of 2001. But events of the following week, September 11th, 2001, placed Pakistan squarely into a frontline position in U.S. efforts to thwart al-Qaeda and other terrorist entities in that area. The assistance Musharraf's government offered the United States in its war in Afghanistan put his administration into direct confrontation with many Pakistanis, especially those who opposed the U.S. invasion and the ensuing raids within Pakistan in search of Taliban and al-Qaeda personnel. Violent attacks within Pakistan escalated, and fears that extremist groups were expanding their spheres amid fears that extremist groups were expanding their spheres of influence in the country, and they were. In December 2001, the violent attack on the Indian Parliament in New Delhi, allegedly by Pakistan-based Kashmiri militants, resulted in a worldwide condemnation of the limited influence exhibited by the Pakistan government to prevent its nationals from committing terrorist attacks domestically and internationally. The United States government in particular was furious with its ally Musharraf for not doing more to contain these groups. But what could he do? I mean, the Pakistan government just didn't have the power to, I mean, it was very complicated. On the one hand, they were supporting these Kashmiri militant groups. On the one hand, remember, as we heard yesterday about questions of strategic depth, which I've always understood as meaning something very different. Pakistan wanting depth of influence in Afghanistan, and Pakistan having very close ties with the Afghan Taliban at this time, especially through the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. So it was a very complicated situation for Pakistan, and not so easy to say, why can't you just control all these people? So merely a month afterwards, remember December 2001 was the attack on the Indian Parliament. The international community was really fed up and frustrated with Musharraf. Basically, the United States said, we're going to tell you to jump and we'll tell you how high. And otherwise, I mean, many people believe that if Pakistan did not have nuclear weapons at that time, the United States may not have given Pakistan the option to be its ally after September 11th. But it did have nuclear weapons and became a close ally of the United States. December 2001, people were frustrated with the Pakistan-based Kashmiri militants who attacked the Indian Parliament. So in January 2002, Musharraf finally took a stand to ban a number of extremist Islamist groups for having terrorist connections, including Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, the TNSM, which became very popular later, which had become very popular by then in SWAT, and the Sipah-e-Sahaba. However, these and many other banned organizations actually periodically reappear with new names, because the new named organizations are not banned. It's only the old names of the organizations that are banned. And they continued their vitriolic tirades and violent attacks. Suddenly, Pakistan too was witnessing something that had never happened there before: violent suicide attacks, which continue today. In preparation for the October 2002 national elections, Musharraf promulgated the heavily debated and problematic what's called the Legal Framework Order of 2002, which made a number of constitutional changes to that 1973 Constitution, including, I mean, people like myself cheered, reinstating the reserved seats for women. This was to mandate women's parliamentary participation, and which had expired under Benazir's first government. Neither Benazir nor Nawaz, nor Benazir nor Nawaz had reinstated it. So suddenly you had no women's representation whatsoever in Pakistan's provincial and federal parliaments. I won't go into what that means unless in the I'm trying to leave enough time for more Q&A later, and I'm happy to expand on that. But also the legal framework order placed minimal educational requirements on candidates running for office. So they had to have the equivalent of a high school degree if they were running for local level elections, a university degree if running for national level elections. They were trying to break the back of the old feudal system that had existed, for example, under Zia-ul-Haq in the early 1980s. His minister for education was from Jodhabad in Khushab, The man had a 5th grade education. How could you be an effective minister of education if you never valued it for yourself? So this was part of the idea behind the legal framework order. And importantly, too, the legal framework order reinstated the highly contested constitutional Article 58(2)b, which gave the president the right to dissolve the National Assembly at his discretion and set in place new processes of appointing provincial governors and judges. Hamid Khan, again the author of The Constitutional History of Pakistan, he argues that the LFO was an attempt to rewrite the Constitution by a military ruler to perpetuate himself in power under dubious authority conferred upon him by an emaciated Supreme Court. Pakistan had woefully been there before. Musharraf's newly, 5 minutes? I thought there was 15 left. Okay, because of the, okay. Musharraf's newly created political party, the PMLQ, was able to assemble a government following the October 2002 elections. But in a significant way, this was a problematic victory. For the first time in Pakistan's 55-year history, an Islamist political party had success at the ballot box. The Islamic coalition, the Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal, or the MMA, won a majority of the vote in the NWFP provincial elections and became leader of the opposition at the national level. This coalition of 6 Islamist parties made an alliance to implement an Islamic system and to protect Islamic values with the objective of ensuring the supremacy of Islamic law and enactment of legislation according to the recommendations of the Islamic Ideological Council. In particular, the MMA was seeking to cross lines where it could pass legislation to structure an individual's degree of religious piety, though indeed this would be the MMA's interpretation of piety. And remember, this was all happening still really under martial law. While the provincial MMA government tried to pass a variety of laws that they could tout as helping to Islamify the area, these efforts were actually short-lived. The most important result of their tenure was that they enabled violent militant groups, euphemistically known as the Pakistan Taliban, including the TNSM and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, to gain a foothold in the province. Providing a space to these groups has been done at great social costs. At the national level, Musharraf's government was increasingly under siege. Militant groups targeted institutions of the state, schools, political academies, even toll collectors on the motorway were blown up. And they attempted to assassinate Musharraf at least twice. People were critical of Musharraf's failure to move Pakistan's economy forward and by the never-ending gridlocks unbridled terrorism was causing in the country. While the US government kept stating publicly that Musharraf could be doing a lot more to support the global war on terrorism, the more the US government would state this, the more the average Pakistani winced at the implication that the Pakistan was just to do this for, was just to follow the US bidding. This didn't go down well with the majority of the population, and Musharraf's popularity declined rapidly. In the course of Musharraf's tenure, there was much criticism of his holding 2 offices simultaneously. One that was appointed, employed as an army general, and one elected as president. Indeed, there was a constitutional requirement that the country's president could not only could not be employed by the state, but that 2 years had to elapse before an individual could ascend to that office. In March 2007, anticipating that the seated Chief Justice of the Pakistan Supreme Court would uphold this requirement and force him from office, Musharraf unilaterally dismissed Iftikhar Chaudhry. This act provoked an unprecedented mass-based movement that has come to be called the Lawyers' Movement. While the Lawyers' Movement was agitating first to have Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry reinstated and then to have him make a decision about the constitutionality of Musharraf holding the 2 offices, Musharraf decided to act for his own political preservation. National elections were scheduled to be held in January 2008, and defying precedent, Musharraf declared that the seated parliament would first be asked to elect the president on October 6th of 2007. By now, Iftikhar Chaudhry had been reinstated as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The day before the presidential election was to be held, Musharraf promulgated the National Reconciliation Ordinance of 2007 with the goal of facilitating the return of Benazir Bhutto to participate in politics in Pakistan by declaring an amnesty on any pending charges against her. However, by declaring the cutoff date as October 12, 1999, a similar amnesty was not given to Nawaz Sharif, who was accused of attempted murder on that date, for not allowing Musharraf's plane to land in Karachi that day when the coup d'etat occurred. Besides, Benazir returned to Pakistan from her home in Dubai 13 days after the passage of the NRO on October 18, 2007. A cavalcade of supporters greeted her, but as they marched through the serpentine streets of Karachi, a suicide bomber attacked her jubilant supporters, killing 115 people and injuring countless more. This foreboding incident occurred while Nawaz Sharif was attempting unsuccessfully to return to Pakistan, and the Supreme Court announced they would soon determine the constitutionality of the October 6th presidential elections. Merely 2 weeks later, just as the Supreme Court was about to announce its verdict about the presidential election, Musharraf took an unprecedented step. He essentially launched a coup d'etat on himself on November 3rd, when he proclaimed an emergency as Chief of the Army Staff and ordered the Constitution would be in abeyance. He claimed various reasons for his actions, including suicide bombings, terrorist attacks, judicial interference, and the judiciary overstepping its authority. Most analysts conclude, however, that Musharraf knew that the Supreme Court verdict on the constitutionality of the election was imminent and would not be in his favor. The government then placed strict controls on the press. They shut down transmission on private television channels. These challenges lamented at the time that they were not even allowed to transmit cricket matches during that period. Were the emergency and the PCO necessary or even improved Musharraf's position in the country? Apparently not, as he was unable to prevent Nawaz Sharif from returning to Pakistan on November 25th. He resigned from the military November 28th, and he lifted martial law on December 15th. The entire judiciary, except for the Chief Justice, was reinstated. The drama that unfolded in Pakistan throughout 2007 was not to end, though, on December 15th. Amidst national campaigning, many politicians were targeted by terrorists. Then on December 27th, just as Benazir Bhutto was waving to the crowd from the sunroof of her car while departing from a campaign appearance in Rawalpindi, a suicide bomber blew himself up right beside her. Benazir Bhutto, heir to the legacy of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the first woman prime minister of a Muslim country and an enduring symbol of democratization in Pakistan, was now dead at age 54. So once again, though, democracy returns to Pakistan. National elections were postponed to February 18th, 2008, both to observe a national period of mourning for Benazir, as well as to enable the PPP to reposition itself as a political party, given the assassination of its leader. The PPP won a third of the seats in the National Assembly and joined forces with other parties to form a PPP-led coalition government. On March 25th, 2008, Yusuf Reza Gilani became Pakistan's prime minister. He has since had to resign. I'm going to skip, well, actually I don't have to, just about done on time. Things have been shaky within the coalition from the outset. Nawaz Sharif, who had been prevented from contesting the election himself because of outstanding legal problems, had vowed his party would prioritize reinstatement of the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Iftikhar Chaudhry. The prevailing view was that PPP chairperson Asif Ali Zardari, widower of Benazir Bhutto, was actually at the helm of power, an assessment that rang even truer when Zardari himself was elected president by the national and 4 provincial legislatures in September of 2008, following the August 18th resignation of Pervez Musharraf. By the time Zardari resigned, Musharraf was floundering politically. He had resigned from the military, his main base of support in the country, had been the target of repeated assassination attempts, and was facing impeachment proceedings. Yet after his departure and Zardari's election, the course of government in Pakistan hardly changed. While the election campaign had focused on the reinstatement of Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, Zardari hemmed and hawed over taking that step. Popular opinion surmised that his concern was that Chaudhry would reopen the many corruption cases that loomed against Zardari, thus he was afraid he'd be forced to resign from office. And this going back and forth is still happening in Pakistan to this day. So in March 2009, Zardari finally acceded to pressure and reinstated the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court over a year after his party had come to power in the national election. I was going to spend a little bit of time talking about the social costs of militarism in Pakistan, but I believe we've run out of time. So let me just but I thought I still had 10 minutes left from the original schedule, but that's okay. So let me just conclude by saying that alliances within the present government have waxed and waned, with one political party leaving the PPP-led coalition while another joins it. There are real threats challenging Pakistan today and jeopardizing its future, but there are also promising signs that democracy is becoming entrenched in the operation of the state. The current government may well be the very first in Pakistan's checkered political history to serve out its term and contest re-election, which is scheduled for sometime in the spring of next year in 2013. Thank you.